What is up, harvesters? My name is Ken. Welcome to Hobby Harvest. I'd like to welcome back my subscribers, and if you haven't yet subscribed, I hope by the end of this video you consider doing so. So today I want to talk to you guys about transitional areas and habitat off of your food plots. We talk a lot about food plots, but today I want to get away from the food plots and talk about the rest of those habitat areas and those habitat improvements you can put on your land. Those transitional areas off of your food plots, but especially the diversity in habitat. So one thing that we probably all kind of learned the hard way after years and years of hunting was that we always find deer in probably the thickest but also most diverse area of the woods. So this applies on private land and public land. That's what you're looking for if you're trying to scout public land and hunt public land, or even if you just own a lot of property and you haven't had the chance to improve all of it yet, and you wanna find a new spot to hunt on your own land. That's what you're looking for, is that just thick cover, but also that diversity in habitat. You don't want like big open woods, but you also don't want like something that's just like a field with the same type of like native grasses in it. We don't typically find deer in these places unless maybe they're running through them, right? And I mean, even when you're driving down the highway too, you see deer off in a field in a monoculture like a bean field or cornfield or alfalfa field or whatever it is. They're usually still always on the edge of that field. Now, I did another video a while ago about how deer utilize edge and how you can use that edge to your advantage by creating it yourself to get deer to move where you want them to move. And I'll link that at the end of this video so you guys can go check that out because it really pairs well with this video. Now, what I'm talking about though with those changes in habitat, that would be like off of the edge of a food plot. I always talk about putting in something like a screening, like switchgrass, that just helps the deer feel safe and secure on that food plot. But that adds to the diversity of the habitat in that area then too, because then you only have like a few yards of switchgrass before you're into some shrubs like red osier dogwood, yellow twig dogwood. Box elders then would be that coming into that next layer if they're more mature box elder, because I always look at it like you want that height to increase as you go into the woods. And by height, I mean like the height of the plant. So your food plot might be really short to the ground, maybe only a couple feet tall. That switchgrass, even a few feet taller. Those shrubs, a few feet taller yet. Those younger box elders will be even a little bit taller yet. And then as you get into the woods, you know, you'll have that high canopy if that's the type of area you're in. But that diversity on that edge is very attractive to all sorts of critters. If I walk around the edges of my food plot, I'm kicking out all sorts of critters. Rabbits, birds, everything from gophers. I've seen possums in there. There's just so many creatures in there because they love that diversity and that change in habitat. And so what you can do with deer then is use that change in habitat to move them where you want them to move. So it could be even something like a pollinator blend. I have a pollinator blend in right now that is actually one of the edges of my food plot, and the deer just follow along the edge between the food plot and the pollinator blend because it's a transition area or a change in habitat, and they follow that edge. So when you have these changes, that's where the deer move. For some reason, I don't know, I think deer maybe are just real picky eaters. We know they are, they're definitely grazers, and they might take a bite of one of my flowers in my pollinator blend before they take another bite out of something in the food plot. They take a couple steps and take another bite out of the food plot. And that's just something they do. That's why I think they like that diverse habitat. They like to have all those different shrubs. They like to have all those different grasses, all of those different native plantings. And that's what you're going for on your land, is just to have as many things as possible. And that's where you're going to find the deer. Now, what you can do to create that on your property is to plant strips of things, put in things like pollinator blends. You can also get in there and do some chainsaw work if you have a high canopy, get some sunlight down there. That's going to help to improve that native growth on the forest floor. Deer obviously don't care what's 50 feet over their head. They want what's down here at their head level when they want browse for food, but also cover. They want side cover. They want to feel safe and secure. They don't really care that they have overhead cover, unless maybe it is like a really bad blizzard or something. You will find them in like the white pines and stuff at that time. But for your normal day-to-day activity, 95% of the days out there, deer are just looking for some thick cover down here at about our head level on down, because the deer is only about this tall. So anything about here on down, that's what they're looking for. That's why they love those shrubs, they love those native grasses, and then of course you're attracting them into a food source like a food plot, but they're not bedding down in your food plot, they're just coming there, they're being attracted to it as a food source. So what we're trying to do is get those native grass plantings if you want to plant native grass plantings, but also you can do things like strips of switchgrass. Pair that with stuff like a pollinator blend. Just create as much diversity in layers. Now I do it off of the food plot. So there's a layer of switchgrass, there's a layer of a pollinator blend, there's a layer of red osier dogwood, there's a layer of willows and box elders, and beyond that we get into some higher canopy trees. In my southeastern Wisconsin food plot, once you go off the one side of the food plot, you're down into some marshy grassland, so there's a lot of different native grasses and flowers and shrubs growing there as well. Obviously red osier dogwood loves to be wet, so there's some of that growing down in there. But you head in and you'll get to a creek eventually, and then you get into really swampy conditions. So this is why in some of my other videos I tell you guys I know the deer do not bed down right off the edge of my food plot in the summer or in early fall. That's because it's way too wet for them to do it there. So there's a ridge that then heads up, and that's where, if they bed down as close to my food plot as possible, where they'll be. But as it gets colder and as that swamp freezes up, the deer will bed down in it. And it's very common for me to find deer beds melted into the snow in an area that you can barely walk in because it's so muddy during the summer. But that's just because they're bedding closer and closer to that food source. As we get later into the cold season, they're relating to that food more, they need that food more, they're burning more calories in the winter, and then they of course will always bed as close to it as they can. But again, that's why you want as much diversity in your habitat as you can get. I have, like I said, the swamp on one side, I have more upland growth on the other side, but the entire thing is in sort of like layers as far out as I have been able to control. Obviously, I haven't been able to control everything. You get out there far enough, it's all just natural habitat, but that's what you're trying to do. The more diversity you can get in there, the better. You will keep more deer closer to whatever you're trying to get them to, be it a food source, be it a bedding area. This works with bedding areas too. You can get that diversity of habitat in there. It gives them more browse in those bedding areas. So you could create the perfect bedding area for deer, for them to just lay down in. They have side cover, they have browse. But if it's only a monoculture of browse, they're going to possibly bed somewhere else that has a higher diversity of browse. So if you can get those native plantings in there, if you can get those pollinator blends planted in there, if you can of course get those shrubs, those soft woody browse shrubs like red osier dogwood. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever broken one open, but it's very spongy on the inside. So that's why deer like it so much. It's not too hard on their teeth like a hardwood twig would be or something like that. So that's why they like that stuff so much. And then that's also why they like box elder when they're a lot younger. And even an older box elder is still pushing out like young growth out of the bottom of it. And deer love browsing on it because it's so soft when it's younger. And just, again, that diversity, I'm gonna say that word a million times, but the more diverse your habitat is, the more deer are going to be attracted to it, the more deer you're gonna be able to put on your property. And if it's thick, like I was talking about earlier, the more deer also you'll be able to compartmentalize. I talk about that a lot too on your property, because deer do not like each other. I know they're a herd animal, they herd up, but it's mostly those doe family groups. It's a doe and her fawns from that year that are herded up together. And then once those fawns grow up, she might have her daughter from like last year, or maybe her sister they'll then herd up later into the season. We see this a lot more towards like gun season in November, where you'll have maybe a herd of 5, 6 does will come in together. But those bucks still tend to avoid those doe family groups, except obviously during the rut. The rut is a whole different time of year, but it's a very small percentage of the year. So when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking about the vast majority of the year and the vast majority of the hunting season as a whole. So we really do not want to just plan our entire hunt around the rut. If you harvest a buck during the rut, great. It's a great time of year to do it. I definitely recommend sitting during the rut. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you that it's a bad time. It's the best time of year to hunt. But what do we do the rest of the season? Because what works during the rut's not going to work the rest of the year. So we need to set our habitat up that way. I would never recommend setting your habitat up on your property just for the rut, because that's such a small part of the entire season. We want to shoot for the whole season, not just that little bit. And you know what? It doesn't matter what you do on your land. You could be sitting in the middle of a field during the rut and a big old buck could come walking right through it in the middle of the day. We've all seen that happen. There's not a whole lot of strategy when it comes to hunting the rut other than get your butt in the stand. Maybe sit over something like a water hole or a water source, because you know those bucks are gonna be going for water because they're moving so much. A high quality food source too, you know, they're still hungry, they still do eat. I know there are some people out there that say bucks lose a lot of weight because they don't eat while they're in the rut. They do eat during the rut, they're just burning so many more calories, that's why they lose a lot of weight. But they are still hitting up those quality food sources, even if it is just to check to see if the does are on them. But while they're there, you'll see them grab a couple mouthfuls just like they normally would. And once you guys get those diverse habitat areas going, that's when it's a great time to get a man-made deer trail cut into those. When you're making those, make sure they're not just a big, long 100-yard straight like shooting lane. I talk about how shooting lanes are bad. Deer do not like to be able to step out into an open area and see forever in both directions. So just make sure those trails wind and weave. Even though you do have a point A and point B in mind, make sure that they are winding and weaving so the deer can't see more than say 10, 20 yards up the trail, depending on how thick of the cover you're dealing with. But because you already have those deer wanting to relate to that diverse habitat on your property, you can then guide where they move through that diverse habitat with something like a man-made deer trail. And you can do this in the woods, you know, just snapping off branches, getting the chainsaw in there and cutting, making an easy path for them to walk on. They will walk on that path of least resistance. That's how we can guide them right where we want them to go. But even if you're out in an open field, I've done this before too. Those of you who watch my channel know that I redesigned my southeastern Wisconsin food plot this year. There were huge advantages to doing that. You guys can check out those videos on my channel as well if you want to see why I did that. But last year there was a part that is now part of the food plot that was just native vegetation, and it led to one of these man-made deer trails that I had leading off into the woods. So all I did was take the lawnmower and I cut a path that zigged and zagged and led to that man-made deer trail that zigged and zagged through the woods. And that's where the deer 50% of the time entered my food plot last year. Now, making the food plot bigger, it now just connects more to where that man-made deer trail is on the edge of the woods, on the edge of those shrubs that are there. So it still connects in the same way. And then of course the deer, the other 50% were coming on the other side of the food plot. And I talk about why my food plots are shaped how they are, why I reshaped it this year, all of that other stuff in that other video. So make sure you go check that one out. Just to recap, you want diversity of habitat on your entire property, whatever you can do to get that. If you want to just look at your entire property as a whole and say, hey, what can I improve? What is the 10% thing that I can improve that's going to have the 90% effect on my property? And this is once you have your food plots and stuff in already, is go look for that biggest area of your property that's a monoculture and change that monoculture. So if it's just big hardwoods or it's just a big open field, you know, go plant a strip of pollinator blend through that open field. Go in there with a chainsaw and cut down a few of those hardwoods. Let some of that sunlight down to the forest floor, and you guys will be surprised at the dividends that pays in years to come. Now, again, I hope you guys got some value out of this video. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, go ahead. I hope I earned that subscription from you. It doesn't cost you a thing. It just helps the channel grow. And if you guys like the video, share it with a buddy, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.